Aloha, listeners and viewers. Welcome to Intermission, a conversation series between artists. Intermission is the Hawaii Chamber Music Festival's exclusive online channel with Broadcast Hawaii. I'm your festival founder and host, Chris YICK, and today we have special guest, cellist Daniel Lelchuk. And for those of you who don't know, Daniel Lelchuk is the assistant principal cellist of the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra. Aloha, Daniel. How's everything going?
Aloha, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, man. So, wow, what a time we live in. We have quarantine, we have protests. There's a lot of unrest going on in the world. How are you dealing with it? Where are you exactly right now?
What a time indeed. I'm in New Hampshire. I've been here for about 2 months. When all of the lockdowns began, I decided better to be in the countryside if I had the option, which I did luckily. So I've been quarantining and self-isolating at a family lake house in rural New Hampshire since the middle of March.
Awesome, awesome. So, I mean, let's go back. Let's backtrack a little bit. Since March, essentially, life has like the brakes have just been slammed for us, right? I mean, we're talking about concert cancellations, masterclass cancellations, travel cancellations, just everything just has come to a stop. How has that affected your life personally?
Everything has stopped. And, we went from performing concerts 3 to 4 times a week and rehearsing and different soloists and different conductors to absolutely nothing. So we went from the routine, which we were
Sure,
all familiar with and we
for
were,
sure.
relatively content with in many ways, to nothing. And so it's not like it went from 60 to 30. It went from
Yeah.
60 to zero. So I think a lot of the challenge for a lot of us who are used to just performing all the time and being in that continual
Hmm.
process of rehearsals and performances and maybe a little teaching on the side, I think that's uh, left such a void that we sit there going, how do we continue? How do we make something of a seemingly bizarre and uncontrollable situations? So for me, that means practicing, that
Sure.
means staying physically active, listening to a lot of music, and finding ways that, in fact, the days happen to go by very quickly for me. I think partially because I feel very busy. And
Yeah,
and I think if you look back 2 months, it gets very strange. And if you try to look forward and predict the future, it also gets very strange. But if you stay relatively focused on the present,
yeah.
then you can, I think, be quite content in some ways.
Sure, absolutely. But, I think this is, in general, most professions haven't been prepared for this pandemic, but something about music, and I think we've had some earlier small discussions about, is just we were not only technologically not ready, we just weren't ready to just shift gears, adjust to sort of a different way of accessibility for our music, right? Would you say that about the profession? In some ways the digital content only now it's being created and released, and now it's super saturated, and even just previous concerts, not a lot of archival audio and video existed, and now people are just slowly digging up things to find. What are your thoughts?
Chris, what is the essence of what music is? It's a gathering of people, right? It's a
Yeah,
gathering of musicians,
sure,
anything from a piano trio to a Richard Strauss or Mahler-sized orchestra,
sure.
and thousands of people in the audience. So, by very definition, it is being thrown the greatest curveball in history in a way,
Yeah, absolutely.
because the gathering is prohibited, and when it will start to be allowed, it'll be in such small and strangely restricted and protective doses that I think it'll be a continual shock to the system. Now, in terms of
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
unpreparedness of the classical music world generally, save a couple organizations, it's extremely costly to produce high quality
Yeah,
audio and video content. Orchestras and opera houses all over the world are not exactly dripping with extra money that they don't know
sure.
what to do with.
Sure.
So being caught flat-footed like this is particularly striking when it comes to the performing arts, because there's a rush to the iPhone camera. There's a
Sure.
rush to the iPhone microphone. And unfortunately, the quality that produces is very low. And I think for a long time after the shutdowns began, for a few weeks, maybe a month, 6 weeks, there was a certain sort of intimate charm to seeing the people that you're used to seeing way up on the stage in the tails and the
Yeah.
white
Yeah.
tie, in the living room like I am, playing a movement. But that's not a sustainable way to continue. And it's not sustainable for many reasons. Obviously, one, you're not selling tickets, but also
Yeah. Absolutely.
the quality just doesn't work. And so people are struggling, and orchestras and opera houses are not there. They're not there, and it's not all their fault, but they're not there, and it's
Sure.
way behind, and it's way too late.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Like, in some ways, would you say after this has been a wake up call to orchestras? The in the past we see stuff on like Apple Music, Spotify. We see the big orchestras, the New York Phil, Atlanta Symphony, Berlin, Vienna, you name it. Any kind of big name orchestra has this plethora of just recording history and all these names attached to videos and whatever. Would you say that maybe like it's time for orchestras to reevaluate how they even spend marketing dollars? Like it's essentially these recordings is a marketing good now. Maybe some orchestras should just pursue maybe doing some recordings after this just to have some sort of archival content. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not an arbiter of the future, and I'm only, able to comment uh, on my own views and from my own
Sure.
limited worldview. But it seems that there has to be some radical reevaluation in terms of reaching people. I mean, you mentioned all these archival recordings that these orchestras have. It's not really much help right now. That's not
Sure.
really saving the New York Philharmonic right now.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
uh, so so the question is, in the limited time that we have to change the narrative,
Hmm.
I'm not sure what can be done. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money to build up such
Sure.
archives that you're talking about. I don't know if that's the solution. I mean, right now the CDC guidelines are saying that there has to be, in the workplace, 6 feet of distance. There have to be masks worn,
Yeah.
etc. I don't even see how you can assemble to play anything larger than maybe a Mozart symphony.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this then. This kind of technology that we're working with, or us musicians are working with now, it's not new. People like used to talk to on Zoom all the time, FaceTime, Skype, whatever you name to it. But now it's like musicians are finally opening up because we have to. Would you say that this is sort of like, in some way, something good because now musicians can finally see that it may not be the most authentic and the most ideal way of reaching out and producing content and performing, but it's something that we're finally waking up to and just utilizing to our advantage. Have you felt the same or
Well,
not really?
I don't know if it's utilizing to our advantage. I don't know. I think that remains to be seen. I think the biggest thing right now that people are concerned about is reaching the audiences and continuing to reach the subscribers and the patrons and the people who are used to seeing these people on stage. I think
Sure.
it remains to be seen if any of that will be effective. I think at some point people are going to start getting tired of low quality video streams
Sure.
and seeing people's faces in 20 different screens mashed into a video of some orchestra. So the question is, outside the traditional way of putting on concerts, meaning 60 to 100 people on stage and a few thousand people in the audience for a one and a
Sure.
half to 2 hour concert, outside that framework, is there a pathway for large performing arts organizations? And I think no one knows the answer right now. I can tell you that people are not rushing back into public
Mhm.
life as small businesses and retail and restaurants start to reopen. There's not an
Yeah.
exodus of people rushing back to be in packed spaces. What is a concert hall? It's a confined space. It's a
Sure.
long evening. It is a crowd that's generally over 55 or 60 and
Sure.
far upwards of that. So, and everybody's packed together, famously the knees hitting the seat of the row in front of you and the
Hmm.
elbows, um, all the boxes for what we are not supposed to be doing, for what is uh, not allowed, actually, are checked by the model of a symphony or an opera or Broadway
Yeah.
or a theater.
Sure.
So, is there another path, or is that the only one? I don't know how helpful Zoom is being, to get back to your original question. I think it's nice to
Yeah.
keep people connected. I think it feels nice to see your colleagues and to maybe play a little music and connect a little bit verbally. What is it
Sure.
doing in the long run? I have no clue if it's doing anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, let's now dive into this pre-COVID world. Obviously, you and I we met last year in Hawaii and we had a blast. But I'm told that you've been coming to Hawaii a lot through our mutual friend Eric. Um, and yeah, I mean, let's dive into the playing portion of your career. You are very accomplished for what you are, and you are the title chair in Louisiana Philharmonic. But on top of that, you concertize all over the world. I mean, I think when I follow you on social media, I see you. One time you're in London, the next time you're in Singapore, the next time you could be in like just New York, and then I'm just like, how does this man juggle all of these trips on top of being a member, a title chair of the Louisiana Phil? I mean, take me through your journey as a career. How did it all start? The musical inspirations.
The musical inspiration started very young. I grew up in a wonderful area of New Hampshire near Dartmouth College. When I was 2.5 years old, I was taken to the local science museum where there was a demonstration about how sound waves are traveled and transferred through the air. And the sound wave is like this, or rather like this, you see. And the museum had hired a cellist to come and play and pull the bow across the strings and show all the kids in the audience. See, when I move the bow, you can actually see the string vibrating, and then you hear the sound. And when the demonstration was over, the cellist invited all the little kids to come up and put the hand right on the top of the cello, and you can
Hmm.
feel the vibrations literally traveling from your fingertips into your hand, up through, towards, around the corner of the elbow, into the shoulder, and directly into your body. And it's an amazing experience. You should try it sometime, with the bass or with the cello. Just put your hand on it. You can feel
Sure.
it going into you like an electric current. And at that point, I said to my parents, I said, I have to play the cello. And luckily, I started when I was 4.5. We found a wonderful teacher about half an hour away. And there was always good music around my house. My parents are not professional musicians, but they're very knowledgeable and very
Sure. Sure.
passionate.
Sure.
My brother was studying violin. It was a very good time. My mom was very attentive with the lessons and with the practice notes, and very nurturing environment. And I think once you're sort of taken hold by that music force at an early age or at any age, it grabs you and
Hmm.
it doesn't let you go. So you don't even really have a choice.
Well, I mean, you mentioned your brother playing violin. I mean, for me, growing up, so I played bass and my sister played viola. And the reason why I chose bass is because the teacher told me you can't play cello. So she said you're either doing bass or viola. And I chose bass because I wanted to have this unwritten sibling rivalry and be better at my instrument. Any of that kind of stuff with your brother, or were you guys just both focused on your own musical path and you just happened to, I guess, be a cellist full time?
I don't really remember a sibling rivalry particularly. I think I started cello. He's 6 years older. There was enough of an age difference and probably enough of an interest difference. I don't think he
Sure,
was ever looking to be a professional violinist. Not that I was quote looking to be a professional cellist, but I think there were
sure.
there were other things with him. And so I don't quite remember that, but I remember just music being a big part of the house. So we had lots of great recordings, of Heifetz and Rubinstein and all the great players, and Piatigorsky. And
Yeah.
so I think I remember when I was 13 years old, I was given a recording by my aunt and uncle, they're both lawyers in Boston, but very passionate music lovers. And the recording was of a cellist. I was 13. I had never heard of it at the time, called Emmanuel Feuermann.
Oh.
And I would wager that most 13-year-olds have not heard of Emmanuel Feuermann. I certainly hadn't.
Yeah.
As I discovered very quickly, of course, Feuermann was one of the great musical artists of all time. He died tragically young
Hmm.
of a infection after an elective surgery in New York in 1943. And I got that sound in my ear. And I think once you hear Feuermann play the cello, you're never the same again. I don't think that's an overstatement. I think it's the level of playing. I remember I had one of those early iPods with the spinning wheel
Sure,
and
sure, sure. Yeah,
and the
absolutely.
buttons. You're probably too young to remember.
No, no, I
and
had one of those. No worries.
and I was at summer camp. I was at summer camp in Maine, you know, doing cello and whatever else they made you do. Cello was not the thing they made you do. They made you do all the other things. And I just remember lying in bed listening to his recording of the Bloch prayer over and over and over. It's about 3 minutes and 20 seconds or something. It's an
Wow.
unbelievable recording. That was maybe when I was 14 or 15. And, you know, memories like that really stay with you. No one had heard of Feuermann. Many people of any age have not heard of Feuermann today.
Sure.
He's not a totally household name at all, like Pablo Casals or
Yeah.
Piatigorsky or obviously Rostropovich. Feuermann is still somewhat unknown outside of the cello world. And but those things stay with you, Chris, because you
Yeah.
get the sound in your ear. And you know, when I put on that CD when I was 13 years old, I thought to
Yeah,
myself when
absolutely.
they gave me the CD, I thought, oh, why couldn't they give me a CD by Dupre or Rostropovich or someone? I put it on, oh my God, you know, that kind of
Sure,
reaction.
sure, sure. Absolutely. Well, let's go even deeper now. I mean, was that was definitely a very memorable experience. But then eventually you had studies in Rome, right, or Italy, and you went on
Yes.
to going outside of New Hampshire and really exploring cello.
Yes, I was outside of New Hampshire a lot. I spent my kindergarten year in Jerusalem. I near to when I started the cello. So a lot of my early beginnings on cello were in Jerusalem. First with a Russian
Oh
teacher,
wow.
then a French teacher. And then fast forward a little bit, I'm in the middle of high school living in Rome. And my mom is the visiting head of writing at the University of Rome. And I'm going to St. Stephen's, which is a wonderful international school. And luckily, I was introduced to a wonderful cellist and wonderful teacher, Francesco Strano, who for about 45 years was principal cello of the Italian string chamber ensemble I Musici. And
Hmm.
I didn't speak much English. I didn't speak much Italian. I should hope I spoke English and barely any Italian. And he really didn't speak English. So the first few months of lessons were something. But he lived about a 25-minute walk from our place. And I used to walk through all the ancient streets of Rome to get to his house, which was on an incredible street off the Piazza Farnese. Anybody who knows Rome knows it's one of the most spectacular squares in Rome, Via Monserrato. And I remember going up and you feel the old world Italian palazzo and the fountains. And you know, I'd been studying starting in the beginning of high school. I've been going to Boston every weekend for lessons,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
you know, with the great musical city. In Rome with Strano, there was an old world feel. He was first of all a much older man than my teacher was in Boston, and there was really a connection to the past. There was an elegance, you know, with the old style, the bel canto that we talked about,
Yeah, absolutely.
the the idea that there wasn't much verbal communication early on because of the language barrier. As my Italian got better, of course, he was able to be more and more articulate. Um, but he was a wonderful teacher, and I remember seeing under his piano lined up his different celli. There was a Montagnana, there was a Tononi, there was a Testori, all of these great cellos lined up, and
Yeah.
you just feel the Italian 18th century, 17th and 18th century string tradition all coming through him to me.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Well, I mean, for me, when I was growing up, before I pursued college, like for music, I had that breakthrough because a lot of people told me that, wow, you could really make a career out of this. For you, I mean, you were in all these great places, you filled with culture and everything. And before we get into your Indiana days, I mean, did you have like a breakthrough that made you realize, wow, I love cello so much. This is what I want to do, and I'm just gonna become a master at this. Like, how did that thought process go into it?
There wasn't one specific moment in which I said to myself, okay, I'm going to do this. I think because I'd started so early, it just
Sure.
was a natural course. I think you just start early, you fall in love with it, and you get better. You start playing with better people. You're exposed to more things. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
being very good in the state of New Hampshire, it doesn't mean a lot, but when you go to Boston, then things get serious. So, um, so it was a natural progression. I remember there was a period around the ages of maybe 9 to 14 or 10 to
Sure.
13 or something like that, where I was a huge opera lover and I was obsessed with Pavarotti. And I was listening to his recording with Freyne and Karajan of La Boheme every day. And I'd been a very gifted boy soprano. I'd given a number of well-received performances in various places as a boy soprano, Mendelssohn's Elijah, things like that. At that
Mm-hmm.
point, I was thinking, boy, it would be great to be a real operatic tenor like Pavarotti. Then my voice changed, and I realized I didn't really know how to sing anymore. that everything was different. So I realized, okay, cello's still here. I love cello. I'm not going to be a great tenor, and so I think, like every instrumentalist, I looked for ways as I got older and listened more carefully to sing through the instrument.
Sure.
If you can't be a tenor, the next best thing is maybe trying to sound like a tenor on the cello. You know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, wow, that's actually very interesting because most people, they're so devoted, so fixated on just, if you're doing piano, then you're just gonna stick it out with piano. But for you, you actually tried branching out into like singing, but then it still brought you back to the cello, which I guess that musical influence has benefited you because I mean, the next step of your life was Indiana. Out of all places in the world you can study, you went to Bloomington, which is fine school. Jacob School of Music, great. Take us through that. I mean, why Indiana? Why get out of your comfort zone of New England, or maybe just go to Philly, maybe go to New York, but why Indiana?
Well, for many years, Indiana University was a cello mecca. Janusz Starker taught there from 1955 until his death.
Sure.
Uh, there were many great cellists that went through there. Why the Midwest? I don't think I ever had a dream to go study in the Midwest or go study in Indiana. I had a dream to be around people like Starker, people like Menachem Pressler, people
Mm-hmm.
like Jamie Laredo, people like Myron Bloom. You see, and all of these people happened to be at a school in Bloomington. Uh, they were not at the New England Conservatory. They were not in New York. And what could be better than having Menachem Pressler be your chamber coach on everything from the Brahms piano quartets to the Schumann to
Sure,
the
sure.
to the Schubert Trout Quintet? There's nothing better than that, really. So the Northeast, was home, and Boston, I had been going every weekend since the beginning of high school, see, when I was in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
New York was, 150 miles or so down the road, and all my friends were going to NEC and Juilliard. There was a group of
Yeah.
friends from my youth orchestra from the Greater Boston Youth Symphony who were a year older, who had all gone to Indiana. I didn't know anything about Indiana other than some of the famous names who taught there and some of the
Sure.
famous names who came out, like Joshua Bell or Gary Hoffman, big big time names.
Sure.
So in
Absolutely.
April, in April of the last year of high school, I went out to Bloomington to visit, not knowing what I'd find. And what I found was just an incredible place. It was spread out, lots of big buildings at the music school. an incredible opera house, 5 full symphony orchestras, lots of conductors, lots of opera there, lots of opera, much more than any other school, more operas than most professional opera companies. They were doing 7 or 8 full operas a year and 3 or 4 full
Wow.
ballets a year. Can you imagine?
Yeah, that's. Oh, I mean, yeah, it's that plus the Midwest. Seems like it's a powerhouse down there, or I guess up
uh,
there.
Over there, yeah, over there. Of course. Um, so that was the culture there was, a lot of people function very well in a very small, contained environment, and others function in a large environment where there's tons of people, and some people fall into anonymity, and you're being bombarded by sort of the numbers. And I
Yeah.
think I could do well in both, but I love the idea that it was such a big school. I love the idea there were so many people around. There were so many recitals, thousands of recitals, literally a year.
Hmm.
There would be weeks where you could go just walk into any of 4 halls and hear a student or faculty recital, 5, 6, 7 times a day,
Sure,
literally.
sure, sure.
The amount of, strange guitar music I heard, or, harp recitals. I mean, I don't think I could name very many harp pieces, but I certainly heard a lot of them. And everything you hear, I think, sort of seeps into your DNA somehow. You may not really know it, or you may not even recall if
Yeah.
you played it or if you heard it, but it's there somehow. I don't think there's such a thing as absorbing a piece and then having it disappear from your psyche completely. So
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
all builds in the richness of the experience.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like, at your time in Indiana, music was just everywhere. You were just being immersed in music left and right, right?
Yeah, there was an immersion, and there was also the community with the friends. And there's nothing like staying up late and listening to Schafrin play the Schumann concerto, or watching Carl Böhm conduct, with 3 friends huddled around a computer, till 3, 4
That's
in the
awesome.
morning. I mean, that's really what I think builds those musical ideas, and shows you the greatness. And when YouTube was really coming into its full power when I was an undergrad, I remember when the videos were, there would only be 10 minutes or something, and then suddenly, oh my God, there's an hour video. There's a whole Brahms symphony we can watch without having to
Sure,
click on a
sure.
new, just sit there and watch and absorb. And I was also at Indiana University in a quartet with another student violinist, and then 2 faculty, Steve Rosinski, who'd been Philly Orchestra a long time, and Georgia Flizanas on the violin, the big concertmaster of Minnesota.
Wow.
All we played for 2 years was music of the Second Viennese School. And when you're playing with faculty and you're a student, as opposed to playing with students and being coached by faculty,
Sure.
it's an amazing experience. And also digging into the richness and the complexities of the Schoenberg quartets, for example, with Georgia, who had studied with Walter Levin and the rest of the LaSalle Quartet, who had really made the early pioneering recordings of the Second Viennese School quartet music. All of that is a very powerful sort of connecting fiber in your musical DNA.
Wow, wow. So, I mean, for what your age is right now, you've had such an accomplished career. And at that point, what? You were just, what, early 20s, and you went from Jerusalem, France, Rome, Bloomington, and I guess all roads led to Louisiana, right? I mean,
Well,
how did the jump happen from your studies in Indiana down to the South?
well, when you're in school and you're starting to think about orchestra auditions, you're just looking everywhere. You generally
Sure.
don't get to choose where you live. So someone had mentioned that there was a title chair opening in New Orleans. I didn't know much about it other than it was a great city, and I knew a couple of people in the orchestra. My friend was a solo clarinet player there, Chris
Yeah.
Bell. And we've been friends since BUTI a million years before, and some other people. And I went down, flew down, and took the audition, and just got to know some of the people in the orchestra that weekend, or that Monday or Tuesday. And it's just an amazing city with a long history of classical music. It had the first opera house in North America, gave a lot of North American premieres of Rossini operas and things like that. Orchestra's been around for a long time. the history there, the unique feeling, the reverence for food, the reverence for music. It's just it's a wonderful place.
Wow. So I mean, in some ways, Louisiana was like a city that just worked out beautifully for you. I mean, take me through the process though. I mean, sure, like you heard about this opening and you were just like, all right, I'll take the audition, have some friends in the orchestra. But did your focus sort of shift gears and you was it just like, I really want this job. I'm gonna practice my butt off and I'm gonna do my best and I hope it works out. Because winning an orchestra job is no easy task. It's a lot of preparation, a lot of, I guess, mental mental exhaustion sometimes, right? With all the with everything.
Yeah, that's what you do. You decide you're going to take an audition, and you get all the music together assembled, and you practice your best, and
Sure.
that's the only thing to do is to try to listen to yourself more clearly and with more detail, to record yourself as much as possible, to be objective as much as possible,
Hmm.
and you go and you play your best.
Wow. So now, how many years have you been in Louisiana?
I've been there about 6.5 years.
Wow. So I mean, from what I've gathered, outside of the orchestra, you play a big part in the community as well. I mean, let's get into it. You have radio, but I've also seen you on YouTube. You've played the Star Spangled Banner for the NBA at a Pelicans game. I mean, that's super cool. It may not sound like the gig of the century, but I think that's pretty cool that you can do stuff like that in a city that you're making a career for yourself. I mean, take me through it. Out off the stage, what has your life been like in such a vibrant city?
Well, to talk about the food thing for a minute that you mentioned, there was a very famous radio show on WWL radio, which is commercial talk radio. The show was
Sure.
called The Food Show. It was on for 33 or 35 years. And the host was a wonderful man named Tom Fitzmaurice, who's a best selling cookbook author and radio host. And he's a fan of the symphony. So when I first moved there, I started calling because it's a call in show. I started calling. I wanted to learn about New Orleans food. It can be very overwhelming. It's a very complex food scene, what is
Sure.
Creole and what is Cajun, and not to mention all the other million restaurants there. So I started calling in, and he gave me the nickname Daniel the Gourmet Cellist. So fast forward a little bit, we got to talking on air, and he'd asked me about music, and he'd actually studied viola maybe 30 or 40 years before with a violist in the symphony. And and I ran into him once outside the hall after a concert, and he says, you have a great voice and you know a lot about food. Would you host the show while I'm gone? I said, I could, but I don't really know anything about radio, Tom. I, I only know how to call in and talk to you.
Sure.
And he says, don't worry, it'll be fine. So I go in and I do it. Now this is 3 hours on commercial talk radio, not a little university station. This is a station that goes to probably 7 or 8 different states
Sure, sure.
live. And I thought to myself, okay, the worst that happens is I just, pull up some articles and start reading them or something, something like that. Of course,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
that wouldn't happen. So I finished the 3 hours. It was on from 3 to 6, and the general manager of the station came in as I was, in my coat. We may have even had a concert that night. Um, and she says, "How long have you been in radio?" And I said 3 hours. And
That's awesome.
so I got asked back a lot to WWL, to the food show. I got to interview a lot of celebrity chefs. I interviewed everybody from Jacques Pepin to Ming Tsai, Joe Nathan from the
Hmm.
New York Times. I mean, just amazing, amazing people. And I realized that I've always liked talking to people since I was a
Hmm.
kid, since I can remember, since 3 or 4 years
Sure,
old, just
sure.
asking questions. But I realized I was good at doing it over a microphone. I was good at doing it in a way that I could try to paint a picture of this person. And I realized that while I loved talking to people, I didn't love only talking to food people,
Hmm.
which then expanded into or what I've been doing recently, which was finally after about 2 years of planning and putting things together, launching my podcast, which is called Talking Beats with Daniel Lelchuk.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So, I mean, public speaking is obviously your forte, but how do you balance that with, I guess, a full-time playing career? If you're having all these speaking engagements, essentially, I mean, take me through that.
Well, some days would be get up very early in the morning. I like to get up early. I like to get up at 5 or 6 in the morning,
Sure.
which I didn't used to, but I find it very, very helpful. Also, even in the quarantine isolation period, get up early in the morning, have a dress rehearsal at 10 to 12:30, then maybe have time for a coffee or something, get a few things in order, go to
Yeah.
the radio station from 3 to 6. There's about a 20-minute walk from the hall. Come to the hall, be there by 6:30, 6:40, play a concert at 7:30.
Wow.
So I did that a lot. I did that a lot. Um, Not because I had to, but because, oh my God, the opportunity to be behind the microphone on a big
Yeah,
station.
absolutely.
I mean, who would say no?
No, absolutely. I agree. What I mean, like, well, but what else in Louisiana? Like I said, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, I feel like you playing the NBA and all that kind of stuff. Those are just smaller engagements that you've had, but they're still impactful community engagements, right? During your time in Louisiana so far.
You know, what could be small to a musician is huge to the rest of the world. This
Yeah,
is yet another
absolutely.
example of how music is divorced from
Yeah.
the rest of the world. In the music world, playing the minute and a half national anthem is just, oh, you blah blah blah. You go play the national
It's
anthem.
another day
To
in the office.
to to everybody else, not that many people play a solo version at an NBA game, by the way, but okay.
Sure.
To everybody else, it's amazing to be playing at an NBA game of the Clippers versus the Pelicans or whatever. Uh, that's amazing. And the amount of people from the teams and the coaches who came up to me said, I never heard the national anthem played in such a way that it moved me so much. Remember, it's a tune that everybody knows, so you can't really mess that one up, right?
Sure,
um,
sure.
Also, I've always found ways to try to bring people into music who wouldn't ordinarily love it. Now, what is the rule? The general rule is that everybody who loves food loves music, and everybody who loves music loves food.
Sure.
It's rare to find that that rule doesn't apply. There's a passion and a discernment and a curiosity that goes along with both. That's always fascinated me. So I designed with the head chef and the sommelier of the legendary restaurant Commander's Palace, which is one of the most well-known restaurants in the country, a wine, food, and music dinner series where people would pay for extraordinary wine, extraordinary food, and music interspersed. So there would be no eating while the music was being played, but a course was served, and Commander's Palace built a stage in one of their private rooms where we played string trios in between the courses. And it was all highly calibrated and very well done. It was written about by lots of magazines and lots of newspapers and by the local ABC affiliate and everything. You can Google it, Commander's Palace music
Wow.
dinner series. And why do I say that? Because a lot of the people who were there because they were devotees of the restaurant, but a lot of the people were there because they were devotees of music, and they
Sure.
thought the idea of seeing such a string trio up close was amazing. So there's an intermingling, you see,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely, absolutely.
possible if you think like that, and that intermingling has always fascinated me, and it's very, very real.
Wow. So would you say in some ways, like you said, food is nourishment for our actual bodies, but the music is nourishment for our soul. So there is sort of this undiscovered fascination or this relationship between food and music, you would say, right? Because you essentially were selling an experience. It's not just your typical, you're eating dinner, there's some background musicians, there's some just, dancers, because that's just part of the restaurant. This is essentially, you're eating fine food while also just, instead of like alcohol pairings, which you did have with the wine and stuff, you have music pairings. Is that essentially what you were trying to sell? Like this sort of full experience, thrill of the senses, you may say.
You sell an experience. You sell what people will remember and cherish. Not that they wouldn't
Sure.
remember a special meal or a special concert, but when
Yeah.
everything works together like that, it's done at a high level. It's amazing. You mentioned food and music. There's so many connections in music to the food world. It's so fun to go looking for those. I
Yeah.
remember you told me once about Chef Chai over in Honolulu and the trout quintet, and he was serving
Sure.
trout. I mean, that's a wonderful. It's one of the more obvious things, but there's so many great food references in literature and in music. Think about the famous dish tournedos alla Rossini, Tournedos, tournedos alla Rossini, which is a dish that Rossini actually invented, which is small rounds of filet, and they're presented like this on a plate with
Wow.
pate, with foie gras, with a Madeira mushroom wine sauce. It's one of the most luxurious dishes you can ever have. If you go to an old
Sure.
style steakhouse, an upper crust, older style steakhouse, they'll make it for you even if it's not on the menu. You can ask for
Wow.
something XYZ alla
Yeah.
Rossini, and they'll know what you're talking about. I was thinking about a wonderful pasta dish, which is rigatoni alla Norma, which is something I really love, which is a tomato sauce with eggplant, lots of basil, and shaved ricotta salata, which is salted ricotta,
Wow.
and it forms the colors of the Italian flag. And it was a dish that came from Sicily. At the time, Bellini's Norma was a very popular opera, maybe the most popular in Sicily. And the saying goes is that the anecdote, not the saying, is that the chef prepared this wonderful pasta dish and brought it to the patrons, and someone exclaimed, it's so good, it might even be better than Norma, the opera. which, which
Wow.
which I love. But what an amazing way for a dish to get a name, you know? And you can
Sure.
order it in many Italian. I make it all the time, rigatoni alla Norma.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Wow. So, yeah, I mean, I guess we just, as musicians, we can definitely find more parallels with cuisine and whatnot. But now let's shift gears. You mentioned earlier it took you 2 years to finally launch your own podcast. And I'm sure, coronavirus and quarantine has allowed you to really focus and hone in on that. What is Talking Beats with Dan Lelchuk?
This is a show where dynamic and compelling people, meaning anybody from any field who's interesting and fascinating, shares their lives and their work. And of course, the tie-in is that they share their favorite music. So this is not a music show per se. It is a show where anybody from any field who has an interesting story to tell or who's doing really interesting work comes and talks to me. And I also ask, what is your favorite music? What are you listening to right now? What moves you? Because music moves everybody, even
Yeah,
if it's not
absolutely.
even if it's not someone who you can find a shred on Google or anywhere about what they think about music. There's always music in everybody's life. I guarantee you. So the show has, why did it take 2 years? It's hard to answer that question. I'm probably not even sure why, but the idea was a very old idea, and I'm very lucky that during this period I had the resource. I have an incredible team, incredible music written for the show, incredible producer who are working on it, and most importantly, incredible guests who want to talk to me. I mean,
Yeah,
amazing people who were there right on the phone with me, being recorded, and then we're releasing one every Tuesday.
sure. I mean, who are some names that you've released already, and who are some upcoming names if you want to share?
Sure. So the first episode that was released was with Walter Isaacson, who was the former managing editor of Time Magazine and former CEO of CNN, and he's the
Wow.
best-selling, I believe, the best-selling author of biography of all time. Written biographies on Einstein, Ben Franklin, Steve
Yeah.
Jobs, Leonardo da Vinci, and he's currently a co-host of Amanpour and Company on PBS, and he also hosts a podcast for Dell about technology. So Walter Isaacson is a fascinating person, absolutely fascinating. And then next, I interviewed and put out Drew Faust, who was a very well-known Civil War historian and the first female president of Harvard University in its entire history. She was the 28th president, The university was founded in 1636, and she was the first female president from '07 to 18. She was the second episode. Coming up, there's going to be Melissa Clark, the head food writer of the New York Times, who
That is
is
awesome.
just inspiring to everybody. Uh, there is Harry Shearer, who's a voice star of The Simpsons. Lots and lots of people, totally varied backgrounds, fantastic people in science, epidemiology, chemistry, business, all over the map. You name it.
Wow. So, I mean, right now with quarantine, I'm sure you have lots of time to just do these interviews, but wow, the names you're mentioning, they're big, obviously. And how are you gonna, I guess, juggle all of this? You know, right now you can, but then it's just I feel like in your position, interviewing these kind of people, there will always be lots of people you can interview, and I think that's what's fascinating, right? Like, are you feeling like you're kind of like a kid in the candy store, just learning all this, absorbing all this info while having great conversation with these people? Like, tell me the experience when it's like making each talking beats episode.
It starts with research. It starts with being curious. Now, that's the easy part for me is being curious because I could
Sure,
interview
sure.
probably anybody and have a, easy hour interview with anybody I see on the street. It starts with doing research. It starts with learning and seeing what kind of a framework you can paint. These generally go half an hour. So the question is, how detailed do you want to get on any specific subject
Yeah,
versus how do you craft an arc of the person's life to paint a picture of them in that half an hour. And so I like to balance both talking about the person's life. Why did Walter Isaacson become the chief executive of CNN?
sure.
What leads to that? One of the first question I asked him was, how do you go from being a newspaper reporter to CEO of CNN?
Yeah,
Oh, really? And he laughed at first and he was chuckling, but it's an amazing thing. And I think that a lot of the questions I ask are questions I haven't quite seen in other places. And getting certain people to connect their expertise to the current time,
sure,
getting
sure.
Drew Faust to find parallels between how America was dealing with death and suffering in the 1860s during and
Hmm.
after the Civil War, connecting it to now. And I think that's what's so stimulating is doing enough research about these people so you know what to say and what not to say. And basically, you have to set them on the right path and
Sure, absolutely.
and let them talk. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Well, also in your experience, I mean, as a musician by profession, you're interviewing essentially people who are not musicians. Do you notice that these, I guess, big names, are they music lovers? Like, have you noticed that they're actually very well, they know music very well. They love music. They listen to music. Yet they hold these, they wear these hats that are just not music related. Have you noticed that kind of stuff with these
Some
candidates?
are more passionate than others. Some really, really know music and would have a hard time telling you what their quote favorite pieces are in the same way that I would. They know so much and
Sure,
they're so passionate. Others give sort of more uh, nebulous answers, but they still listen to music. So
sure.
I've not encountered anybody who doesn't listen to music. I'd say some people's experience with music is simply that they have a CD player with 5 CDs, and it's been the same thing for 30 years. They go into their workspace and they put on one of these CDs that's
Sure.
been next to their CD player for 30 years collecting dust, but they still love it, and it still
Hmm.
means a lot to them. Music speaks to everybody. I don't think there's anybody I can think of who doesn't listen to music at some point in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So, now we've gotten into your education, your career, your time in Louisiana, and now this passion project of yours. But on top of all of that, you are a traveling and concertizing cellist as well. I mean, let's get into the nitty gritty of that. Obviously, there's a lot of relationships involved with many wonderful music colleagues, but at the same time, there's a logistical nightmare, I feel, right? I mean, you're traveling with the cello You're going to different time zones. You're going places all over the world from left and right. I mean, take me through that. How are your experiences in that?
Well, part of the fun of it is that since I love talking to people, I never get bored and I never get tired in airports and on planes. Okay, I can sleep on a plane actually better than almost
Sure.
anybody I know. But in an airport, waiting for the flight or something, I love just sitting down next to someone and striking up conversation. And I think if you love people, you love being around people, you love talking to people. It doesn't really get tiring. The time zone, nothing. I'm very good with jet lag also. So basically,
Yeah.
land. And what's the most important thing to do when you get to a new place? It's to experience the local culture as quickly and deeply as you can in a very short time.
Sure.
I was interviewed by a friend of mine, the writer Tara Isabella Burton, for an article she wrote in the Wall Street Journal about a year ago about what do you do when you're in a foreign place. And so she asked me, Dan, you travel a lot. What do you do when you're in a foreign place? I said, the most important thing to do is you buy the local newspaper. Doesn't matter if you speak the language or not. You
Wow.
tuck it under your arm
Interesting.
and you get on the subway or you sit at a coffee shop. There have been times where I buy the International Herald Tribune and I stick it under, say, the paper in Hungary or something. So I'm holding the newspaper like this in a coffee shop, but I'm actually reading the English and the newspaper stuck under. Why? Because you don't need to draw attention to yourself as being the outsider, as being an American, as being
Sure.
a foreigner. I like to fly under the radar like that. I like to go to a coffee shop and have it be, this is the place I'm going to go for the 3 days I'm here. And in those 3 days, you can build an amazing relationship with the barista or with the woman who comes with a young daughter at 8:30 before school.
Sure.
This is the kind of things, the repeated interaction that make life so rich, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure a big part of traveling, as you may know, since you're, a food lover, is the cuisine that you must experience. That definitely goes into play with the whole cultural experience you have in the short amount of time, right? I mean, even our little trip, or I guess even when you came to Hawaii last year, I was a man on a mission for you, Dan. Like I was trying to find you the best restaurants, right, throughout for your whole experience.
That's
But I
right.
mean,
That's right.
yeah, I mean, take me through that. Like, how do you find 3 days in a big city, big country, whatever? Like, how do you even choose where to eat and where to spend your time at that point?
That's a very good question. I think staying away from the internet is probably good in that respect. I go by personal recommendations. I've been to so many restaurants that have these ridiculous reviews online, and I'm going, this is why you don't trust one of these, I don't know, TripAdvisor or something ridiculous, because most people
Sure,
most people either write a terrible review because they go to a restaurant on an off night. Remember, restaurants have off nights like
sure,
people,
absolutely.
you know. That doesn't mean they're a bad restaurant. It means they had an off night.
Sure.
If you know, if you went by the reviews online, you practically wouldn't go anywhere to eat.
Yeah,
So I have lots of friends who know all the cities and all the places to go. Buenos Aires, I can tell you, you go to Piagari Steakhouse. And I'm getting to be sort of one of those people that people ask, where do I go? And they name the city, and I'd say, go here and order this. But how do you know where to go? You ask people who you trust. It comes back to people. Why would I
sure.
trust random people on the internet, half of which may be bots? When I can
Sure.
ask well-traveled friends who actually have taste for these restaurants. So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
say, I say Jimmy or Carlos or whatever. I call up friends. I say, where do I go? And they tell me. And I haven't been misled. Probably, I don't think I ever have. I
Yeah.
mean, or you in Hawaii. When people say, what kind of food do you like? I say, I like everything. It just has to be good.
Wow. I mean, so you're getting a lot of fulfillment from the social cuisine scene in these big cities in these countries. But now let's talk musically. Like you played, for example, Schubert Cello Quintet last year in Hawaii. But I'm sure it wasn't the first or last time you're playing Schubert Cello Quintet. So
Mhm.
so how is your experiences of playing a same piece in a different city like? or whatever you're doing when you're concertizing, like the music making part of it. How is that experience for you?
Yeah, it all depends on who you're playing with. I think music is one of those things that where the geography leads you sort of disappears once you get on stage. It's all about the people. So
Sure.
the rehearsal can feel very similar whether it's in New York or Honolulu, or Rome or Shanghai. Everything is different until you get on stage for the rehearsal or the concert and you start playing, and suddenly, to me, it doesn't really particularly matter in a way, just for that small amount of time that the concert or the rehearsal is taking place. Before and after, a whole new world. But
Sure.
I think when you reach a certain level of just professionalism and devotion, nothing else really matters. Even if you're sick or you're in a fight with the violinist or something, nothing really
Yeah,
matters
yeah, yeah.
once you start
Absolutely.
playing, because you know you're there as servants to the music.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what is your experience with just audience engagement in all these incredible cities? I mean, I'm sure you're getting great audience, you're getting great feedback, but what's the energy like? For example, when I was asking a violinist one time, you're playing Vivaldi Four Seasons everywhere. Like everyone knows the piece, but what is the audience reaction from when you play it in Shanghai versus how you play it in Honolulu, right? So I mean, the same apply. I guess I'm just asking you the same. Like, what is this energy that you feel from the audience in these different places?
Well, everybody has a different feel because every culture is so different. you
Sure.
know take an audience in Hawaii. There's an exuberance, there's a colorfulness, there's a passion there that maybe you don't find in some other places. In Boston, you have highly knowledgeable audiences, highly
Sure.
knowledgeable, but they're not screaming and putting a lei around your neck after the concert. You feel the culture from the audience. But the basic thing to remember is that every audience wants to be there. And if they're there in the hall, they really want to be there and they want to love music. They want to love the experience and they want to take in everything you're trying to offer, or rather, take in everything the composer is trying to offer via you, the player.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Wow. Well, I mean, now I guess let's dive into, you play a lot of orchestral rep, you play a lot of chamber rep, you play a lot of solo rep. As a cellist, you have this huge range of repertoire, whereas us bassists, we're lucky to have four concertos. What are your favorite pieces? I mean, you play all these concerts. I'm sure you've had many repeat programs, especially being in a symphony orchestra. But what are, yeah, what's your bread and butter? What do you really like to play?
That's a tough question. The easy answer to that is my favorite piece is the one I'm playing at the moment. That's probably an answer you hear a lot. But besides that, in terms of the really, there's nothing like a Brahms symphony. There's nothing like a Strauss
Sure.
tone poem. There's nothing like a Mozart. I love playing the Mozart piano concerti. Actually, they're just such fantastic pieces,
Yeah.
and the interaction. I love when I'm really close to the pianist, and um, there's, I mean, a Brahms slow movement, that's pretty hard to beat. But
Yeah.
anything.
No,
I mean,
definitely.
the Haydn symphonies, the Schubert's newer music is uh, sometimes really, really interesting and really gratifying to play. And it depends on the mood. So sometimes all you want is a Rossini overture.
Sure.
Sometimes for me, there's nothing better than a Rossini overture, and sometimes there's nothing better than a Mahler symphony. And
Yeah. I mean,
we need it all, to feed the soul. We need the whole range.
sure, sure. I mean, do you ever find yourself just like late at night, just scrolling through maybe new music even? Like I think you mentioned even before, like especially now, discovering hidden gems is something up your alley, right? I mean, you talked. I think you briefly told me before about different composers, and we talked about, oh yeah, there's the Schumann, the Elgar, the Dvorak cello concertos, but there's also this. Same thing with when it comes to sonatas.
Yeah, that's right. There's the cello repertoire, since you mentioned it, is not a huge repertoire for the concerti, but there's so many wonderful pieces that I really like. The Respighi Adagio con Variazioni is a wonderful piece for cello, and
Wow.
the Haydn Sinfonia Concertante for violin, cello, oboe, and bassoon is a great piece. It has so much vivaciousness and so much light, and it's just a wonderful piece. So I'm
Sure.
always looking to discover new repertoire. I mean, I was listening to a lot of Schumann piano music the other day, and then people send me things all the time. All the time, they send me just Spotify links or YouTube links,
Yeah.
and I listen to it all, and you know, there's so much to hear out there. It's unbelievable. There's so much to hear, and it's very easy to just listen to what you know. I mean, I love Così fan tutte. I wish I could listen to that all day, every day. I'd
Sure.
probably be happy doing so. But
Yeah.
there's a lot out there as well.
You know, with all this repertoire that you performed and whatnot, are there pieces that you really want to just get into now?
There are pieces I want to get into now. I think a lot of it is maybe more chamber music. I would love to play more Beethoven string quartets.
Wow.
In school, I had a quartet, and it was wonderful. And there's not really time to play in a full time quartet when you're in an orchestra. Full time is in that's you really rehearse for hours a day, like a real quartet does. But my God, to play the Grosse Fuge, to play another of the late Beethoven quartets would be unbelievable.
Damn. Alrighty. Well, I mean, Dan, let's slowly wrap things up. You've had an incredibly accomplished career for your age. You've been to Hawaii twice. But you also have all these other non-cello engagements. Like what happens from now? I mean, with COVID and this looming uncertainty, is it your sense of curiosity that's keeping you moving forward, or what happens now? What more would you like in your career?
I think I want to keep talking to people. I want to keep recording episodes for the show Talking Beats with Daniel Lelchuk, uh, and see where that leads. I've been very lucky that so many people have wanted to do it. So many people who are in the public eye who want to offer something to my show and want to get on the phone and talk to me. I'd love one day to be able to record those in person, by the way. It's so much more fun when you can see somebody and see their eyes, see how they react, rather
Yeah,
than over
absolutely.
a phone call. What keeps me going is a curiosity and the love for people. There's just not enough time in the day to learn and talk to and do all the things I want to do, even when I'm not playing concerts. So I can't imagine what it'll be like if things go back and I'm playing. 24 hours is not enough, man.
Well, Dan, I mean, let's wrap things up. Like, this has been incredible, incredible conversation, and I think for me at least, I've learned so much not only about you, but just sort of everything music can dive into, like all the relationships music has. And I guess, what is the end goal? I mean, if you had to play your final cello recital, what would you want to program? I mean, if this is like, let's
And
let's take a page out of the athletic book. This is your retirement concert. This is it. What would you want to play? What's the last hoorah you want to go out with?
oh God, I think it would be great to go out with a I'm just going to name a long program. It'll be too long, but
Sure.
we'll, take a coffee break in between or whatever. I think it would be great to do a Beethoven cello sonata. It would be great to do the Haydn Divertimento arranged for cello and piano by Piatigorsky, which has one of the
Sure.
most beautiful adagios I know for cello. A short piece, 3 movements, a fantastic piece. A piece Stalker played a lot too. I would want to do I love the Mendelssohn D major sonata, although the Haydn's also in D major. So, and you don't want too much of the same key on one program, so they say. So I would separate it, maybe by something like the Hindemith solo sonata, good piece. Ligeti solo sonata is a great piece. Both are relatively short. The Henze Serenade is a decent piece, not great but decent.
Sure.
Um, Interesting to throw in some music like that. I guess there would have to be a Bach suite if it's my last recital ever, the sixth.
Awesome, awesome. Well, for those of you listening and viewing, we hope you like everything Dan Lelchuk. We're gonna have more episodes like this, and we hope you subscribe to Broadcast Hawaii and stay tuned to hear from more artists just like Dan. Dan, is there any final or last comments? We gotta bring you back to Hawaii after this is all done and have a meal at Chef Chai's. I know that. But
Absolutely.
any
Back to Hawaii. Final last comments to quote Pete Seeger, keep on keeping on.
awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. I'll see you soon.
Thanks.